She was 15. He was 23. And for nearly 50 years, television audiences watched them fall in love on screen without ever really knowing what that romance cost the girl behind it. Now, in her own words, on her own social media, and in the wake of her co-star's tell-all memoir, Melissa Gilbert has finally said out loud what she couldn't say as a teenager on a closed set in the 1970s. What she revealed didn't just reframe one of television's most beloved love stories. It changed the way an entire generation of fans understands what they were actually watching all those years ago. Stay with us, because by the end of this video, you may never look at Laura and Almanzo the same way again. For millions of viewers who grew up with Little House on the Prairie, Melissa Gilbert wasn't just an actress. She was Laura Ingalls, the freckled, big-hearted farm girl who ran through wheat fields, argued with her sister, and eventually fell in love with a handsome young farmer named Almanzo Wilder. The show followed the Ingalls family through poverty, illness, hard winters, and small-town joy in the fictional community of Walnut Grove. It wasn't flashy. There were no explosions, no plot twists ripped from a thriller. It was simply a family trying to survive and love each other, and that simplicity is exactly why it became one of the most enduring shows in American television history. At the center of nearly every storyline was Laura, played by a young girl who grew up in front of the cameras almost as visibly as she grew up in real life. Melissa Gilbert was only 9 years old when she landed the role that would define her childhood. Before that audition, her life already looked nothing like Laura's quiet farmhouse existence. She was born in Los Angeles in 1964 and adopted as an infant by actor and comedian Paul Gilbert and dancer Barbara Crane, meaning she grew up inside the entertainment industry rather than outside looking in. She was doing commercials by the time she was 7, and casting directors noticed something in her that was hard to fake. She didn't perform like a child actor reciting lines. She simply felt real on camera. That authenticity is exactly what caught the attention of Michael Landon, the show's star, director, and one of its producers, when Melissa auditioned for the role of Laura. Landon didn't just cast her. He became one of the most important father figures in her life, especially as her own parents' marriage began to unravel. She has spoken for years about how much his mentorship shaped her, both on set and off. For 6 seasons, Laura Ingalls grew up on screen the way real children grow up, awkwardly and gradually. She went from a mischievous little girl to a teenager navigating school, friendship, and eventually romance. That shift brought a new character into the show, Almanzo Wilder, the man Laura would eventually marry. The role was given to a 23-year-old actor named Dean Butler, who joined the series in its 6th season. From his very first scenes, audiences responded to him. He had an easy, steady warmth that made the courtship between Laura and Almanzo feel believable, even inevitable. Fans wrote letters. Magazines speculated. An entire generation grew up convinced that what they were watching on screen had to be real because it looked too natural to be scripted. What most viewers didn't know at the time, and what has only become public in the last couple of years, is that the actress playing Laura was 15 years old when the show required her to kiss a 23-year-old man for the first time, on national television, in front of millions of people, with no rehearsal for what that would feel like emotionally. Dean Butler has since written openly about this in his own memoir, Prairie Man, My Little House Life Beyond, released in 2024. In it, he described the age gap in blunt terms, saying that back then, an 8-year difference between a teenager and an adult felt enormous, even if audiences today might not think twice about it. He also revealed something that never made it into any fan magazine at the time. Melissa's mother was reportedly so uncomfortable watching her daughter film a romantic scene with an adult man that she became visibly upset on set, prompting the director to stop filming altogether. Butler called it a protective reaction from a mother who simply could not bear to watch. For years, this part of the story stayed buried under nostalgia. The show ended in 1983, reruns kept airing, and the public narrative around Laura and Almanzo stayed frozen in soft focus and slow-motion running scenes. But in November of 2025, Melissa Gilbert did something she had largely avoided doing for decades. She posted directly and publicly about what it actually felt like to be 15 years old and expected to perform physical intimacy with an adult co-star. She didn't frame it as a scandal or an accusation against Dean Butler personally. She framed it as a reflection on an industry that, at the time, simply didn't ask whether a child was ready for what it was asking her to do. In her post, she made her age and vulnerability explicit, essentially saying that she was still a child during those scenes and that she was fortunate to have people around her, including Michael Landon and her mother, who worked to keep her safe. She also acknowledged, in the same breath, that not every young performer in her position has had that kind of protection. That post reignited a conversation that had been quietly building since Dean Butler's memoir came out, and it set the stage for what came next. In December of 2025, Butler sat down for an episode of the Little House on the Prairie 50th Anniversary podcast alongside their former co-star Allison Arngrim, who played Nellie Olson. During that conversation, a fan-submitted question asked directly how Butler felt about the age difference between himself and Gilbert. His answer was surprisingly candid. He admitted that at the time, he didn't spend much energy thinking about the age gap because he was simply focused on doing his job as an actor. But he also didn't dodge the deeper point. He acknowledged that what was considered normal casting in the 1970s would almost certainly draw serious criticism if it happened today, and he said so plainly in interviews tied to his book's release, noting that the pairing probably wouldn't happen at all under modern standards. That admission, coming directly from her former on-screen love interest, gave Melissa's earlier comments even more weight. It wasn't just her perspective anymore. It was a shared acknowledgement from both people at the center of that romance that something about the situation was, by today's standards, deeply uncomfortable. What makes this moment different from typical Hollywood gossip is that neither Gilbert nor Butler used it to attack each other. If anything, the more they've both spoken publicly, the more it's become clear that their relationship behind the scenes was never romantic and never adversarial. It was, by both of their accounts, a working relationship built on trust, professionalism, and a fair amount of protectiveness on his part. In interviews, Butler has described Gilbert as remarkably skilled for her age, someone who had complete trust in Michael Landon, who supervised their scenes closely to make sure nothing crossed a line. He has also spoken about receiving letters and comments at the time from concerned mothers who found the pairing hard to watch, which mirrors exactly what Gilbert's own mother apparently felt on set. In other words, the discomfort wasn't something invented decades later for a memoir. It existed in real time, among real parents, watching a real child perform a scripted adult romance. This is the part of the story that separates fact from the rumor mill that has followed Melissa Gilbert for 50 years. For most of her adult life, the public conversation about her and Dean Butler centered on one persistent question: were they secretly in love off camera the way their characters were on it? That question made sense from the outside. The chemistry looked effortless, and in an era before social media, fans had almost nothing to go on except a handful of interviews and the show itself. But both Gilbert and Butler have said, consistently and separately, that their off-screen relationship was never romantic. What we now understand, thanks to their more recent and more honest public statements, is that the real story underneath that romance wasn't secret love. It was a teenager doing a job that, in hindsight, asked far too much of her far too soon, alongside an adult co-star who, by his own admission, tried to treat her with care but who also recognizes now that the entire arrangement wouldn't hold up under today's expectations for protecting young performers. To really understand why this moment matters so much to Melissa Gilbert, it helps to look at what her life looked like once the cameras stopped rolling on Little House on the Prairie in 1983. Leaving a show that had defined nearly a decade of her life wasn't a clean break. She had spent her entire adolescence being recognized as Laura Ingalls, and Hollywood, as it often does with former child stars, wasn't especially generous about letting her grow into other roles. She took on television movies, stage work, and voice acting, and she later appeared in projects like Babylon 5 as she pushed to be seen as more than the girl in braids. Off-screen, her life moved through very public chapters: a long relationship with actor Rob Lowe, a marriage to actor Bo Brinkman that gave her a son named Dakota, and a later marriage to actor Bruce Boxleitner that brought 2 stepsons into her life. Both marriages eventually ended in divorce. In her 2009 memoir, Prairie Tale, Gilbert wrote candidly about struggles that never made it onto any highlight reel: alcohol addiction, self-doubt, cosmetic surgeries that didn't go as planned, and the disorienting experience of growing up as a public character before she'd had the chance to become a private person. She has talked openly about the pressure she felt as a young actress to fit a certain Hollywood mold, including undergoing plastic surgery as a teenager, and about later reversing some of those choices as she got older and prioritized authenticity over image. In 2016, she briefly stepped into politics, running for a congressional seat in Michigan before dropping out for health reasons, a chapter that showed a very different side of her public life. And in 2013, she met actor and director Timothy Busfield, whom she later married, eventually settling into a quieter, more rural life away from the spotlight that had defined her since childhood. That quieter chapter is part of why her 2025 comments about Dean Butler and the age gap carry so much weight. This isn't a young actress trying to generate headlines. This is a woman in her 60s, decades removed from the show that made her famous, choosing to speak plainly about an uncomfortable truth rather than let nostalgia keep smoothing it over. She wasn't accusing anyone of wrongdoing. She was naming something that a lot of former child performers have started naming in recent years, as public conversations around consent, protection, and the entertainment industry's treatment of young actors have shifted. Her message wasn't about tearing down a beloved show. It was about acknowledging that the adults around her, particularly Michael Landon and her own mother, worked hard to shield her from a situation that could easily have gone wrong, and that not every child in her position has had people willing to do that. Dean Butler, for his part, hasn't tried to distance himself from that reality either. In multiple interviews tied to his memoir, he's been remarkably direct about the fact that the original Little House book series, written by the real Laura Ingalls Wilder, actually described Almanzo and Laura with a 10-year age gap, with Almanzo closer to 28 and Laura around 18 when they married. The television show compressed that timeline and, in doing so, put a much younger actress into far more intimate scenes than the source material ever called for. Butler has acknowledged that casting decision probably wouldn't happen in today's industry, and he said so without deflecting blame or pretending it wasn't a real issue. That kind of mutual honesty, from both the actress and her former co-star, is a large part of why this story has resurfaced so meaningfully decades after the show ended. So, what does this mean for how fans should remember Laura and Almanzo? It doesn't mean the show wasn't good, or that the performances weren't genuinely impressive. If anything, knowing the real story makes Melissa Gilbert's performance even more remarkable. She was a 15-year-old asked to convincingly portray an adult woman falling in love, and she did it well enough that audiences believed it for 50 years. That's not a small thing. But it's also not the whole story. The whole story includes a nervous mother who couldn't watch, a director who stepped in to protect his young star, a grown man who tried to be respectful of a colleague nearly a decade younger than him, and a girl who, by her own recent account, was simply too young for what she was being asked to do on camera. None of that erases the show's legacy. It adds context to it, the kind of context that only becomes possible once enough time has passed, and enough people are willing to speak honestly instead of just repeating the same soft-focused nostalgia. Today, Melissa Gilbert is far removed from Walnut Grove. She's an author, a former political candidate, a wife, a mother, and someone who has spent the last several years talking openly about aging, body image, and the toll that Hollywood's expectations took on her as a young woman. Dean Butler has become something of a historian for the show he helped make famous, writing his own memoir and appearing on anniversary retrospectives that revisit the series with a more honest, more modern lens. Together, without ever needing to reignite old rumors of a secret romance, they've done something more valuable than confirming a decades-old fan fantasy. They've told the truth about what it actually took to make that fantasy look real in the first place, and in doing so, they've given fans a fuller, more human picture of two people who were never actually in love off camera, but who created one of television's most convincing love stories anyway, under circumstances that neither of them pretends were perfect. What do you think about what Melissa Gilbert and Dean Butler have shared about their time on Little House on the Prairie? Does knowing the real story change how you see Laura and Almanzo's romance? Let us know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the true stories behind the shows you grew up watching.